The death certificate spelled her name wrong. My mother signed it anyway. 32 years of Sunday dinners, and they buried a stranger. I'd loved that kitchen once. The way morning light caught the copper pots. The way my sister's laugh used to fill the silence between heartbeats. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Cream-colored, expensive, the kind reserved for weddings or wills. I recognized my aunt's handwriting, the careful loops she'd perfected in finishing school. Inside, a single document. Official. Final. Warm breath turned to ice along my spine. They'd given her a different surname, a different birth date. 3 decades of sisterhood reduced to clerical fiction, and the family crest pressed into the corner like a wax seal on a lie. I called my mother first. The phone rang 6 times. We thought it best, she said. No greeting, no pretense. Simpler this way. Simpler. The word hung between us like smoke. I heard ice cubes clink in her glass. 11 in the morning, already on her second pour. Behind her, my uncle's voice murmured something about the estate and complications. Her name was Maya, I said. Silence. Her name was Maya, and she was your daughter. The line didn't go dead. That would have been mercy. Instead, I heard my mother exhale. Long. Slow, the way she did before delivering verdicts at dinner parties. The service is Saturday. Black only. No flowers from you. She hung up. I stood in my kitchen for 11 minutes. I know because the coffee maker beeped 3 times. Ignored. The document still warm in my hands. Someone had typed Mary Ellen, where my twin's name belonged. Someone had erased her. Gone. The copper pots caught the light again. Same kitchen, same morning. Everything different now. I set the certificate on the counter and opened my laptop. Somewhere in the family's digital trail, there had to be a reason worth killing a name for. I already knew which safety deposit box held the answers they'd paid to bury. 406. That's when I walked into my Uncle Richard's study without knocking. He didn't flinch. Men like him never do. He simply closed his laptop, slow, deliberate, and folded his hands like a priest preparing absolution for sins he'd already forgiven himself. You found the certificate. Not a question. A measurement. The room smelled of old leather and older money. Bookshelves lined with volumes no one had opened in decades. A grandfather clock ticked somewhere behind me, counting seconds I'd never get back. Snap. His pen cap. He was already reaching for paper, already calculating what this visit would cost him. Maya's name, I said. You changed it. The family changed it. He leaned back. There's a difference. I watched the afternoon light crawl across his desk, illuminating dust motes suspended in the silence between us. Tiny particles, invisible most days, but angle the light just right and suddenly you see everything floating in the air you've been breathing. She was sick, he continued, toward the end, confused. She asked us to handle things. The lie landed soft. Practiced. I'd heard him use that same cadence at board meetings, at charity galas, at my father's funeral, when he'd convinced everyone the business was fine. It wasn't. She wasn't confused. My voice came out quieter than I intended. She called me 3 days before she died, told me she'd found something about the foundation. His hands stopped moving. Cut. Just for a moment. Half a heartbeat. His mask slipped. I saw it. The flicker behind his eyes that said I'd step closer to the wire than he'd expected. Your sister had episodes. He recovered fast. We didn't want to burden you with the details. The grandfather clock struck the quarter hour. 4:15. I'd been in his study 9 minutes, and already I understood. This wasn't grief management. This was evidence suppression. Their confidence cracked, thin as old porcelain. I turned toward the door, let him think I was retreating. Richard, I paused at the threshold. Where did you bury her personal files? Silence stretched in the room. My next move would ignite everything. The applause scraped like static across my skin. Champagne coated my tongue in cold metal. 300 guests laughed in perfect synchrony, and the sound flattened to 10 beneath the cathedral ceiling where they'd gathered to mourn a woman whose name they'd never speak. The eulogy began at 6 sharp. My cousin Eleanor took the podium. Pearls, black Chanel. The same tremor in her voice she'd used at her own wedding, performative grief wrapped in old money diction. She unfolded a single page, and I watched the chandelier light catch the family crest watermarked into the corner. Mary Ellen, she began, was a quiet soul. Crack. The name landed like a slap across marble. I felt my mother's hand find my elbow, a warning dressed as comfort. Around me, relatives nodded, dabbed eyes, believed every syllable because believing was easier than remembering. Maya had never been quiet. She'd been thunder in a teacup, the one who asked questions at Christmas dinner that made uncles excuse themselves early, the one who had pulled financial records when the foundation's numbers stopped adding up. He hesitated. My Uncle Richard, third row center. I caught it, the way his jaw tightened when Eleanor mentioned her final wishes. His eyes flicked toward the exit, then back. Measuring distance. Calculating exposure. The eulogy continued. Sanitized. Scrubbed. They spoke of charity work she'd abandoned at 19. Mentioned a fiancé she'd left at 23. Skipped the decade she'd spent auditing family trusts. The questions she'd raised about offshore accounts. The documents she'd photographed 3 days before her heart simply stopped. I stood invisible while they edited my grief for an audience. Snap. My heel against the stone floor. Accidental. Every head turned. Eleanor faltered mid-sentence, her rehearsed cadence broken. In my coat pocket, my phone pressed against my hip, Maya's last voicemail still saved. Her voice, her real name, her warning, all of it time-stamped and backed up to 3 separate clouds. The service ended with a hymn I didn't sing. Guests filed toward the reception hall. Crystal. Canapes. Conversations calibrated to avoid anything true. I lingered by the registry table. The leather-bound book lay open, signatures still drying. Beside it, the official certificate, framed now, museum-quality glass, the forged name etched permanent. But beneath the frame's edge, a second document peeked out. Unfinished, unsealed, cut. Someone had prepared a backup. Someone who wasn't finished yet. I brushed my fingers across the glass, letting my reflection blur against the lie they'd mounted for display. The reception noise swelled behind me. Laughter, ice cubes, the soft percussion of expensive shoes on harder floors. I hadn't noticed the second seal was already warm. The same metallic tick I'd heard in the corridor archive, faint, persistent, coming from somewhere behind the basement door my family pretended didn't exist. I'd found the key in Maya's jewelry box, tarnished brass, no label, hidden beneath a tangle of chains she'd stopped wearing years ago. The lock gave without resistance. Some doors want to open. The stairs descended 12 steps. I counted each one. Snap. A pull chain light swung overhead, casting shadows that moved wrong. Filing cabinets lined the walls. Decades of secrets organized alphabetically, cross-referenced by guilt. My uncle's handwriting labeled every drawer. The tick again. 80 seconds exactly. A timer somewhere, or a pipe expanding in the cold, or something else entirely that I didn't want to name yet. I found the ledger in the third cabinet, unmarked spine, pages soft from handling. The kind of book that gets opened in private, after midnight, when the house believes everyone is sleeping. Cut. Maya's name appeared on page 47. Not Mary Ellen, Maya. Her real name, her real birthday, her social security number printed beside a figure that made my vision swim. Sold. The air cooled 1 degree. I turned the page. More names. More numbers. Identities cataloged like inventory, each one assigned a transaction date and a destination code I didn't recognize. Then another degree. The basement had no ventilation, no reason for the temperature to drop, but my breath started to cloud in front of me. Then the frost started to form on my exhale. The tick returned, closer now. I wasn't the storm anymore. I was the forecast, standing at the edge of something that had been brewing long before I'd knocked on Richard's study door. Snap. A door upstairs. Footsteps crossing the kitchen floor I'd memorized as a child. Someone else was home. Someone who knew about the basement key, and the cabinets, and the ledger I now held against my chest, like evidence or a weapon or both. I photographed 17 pages in 90 seconds, hands steady, heart anything but. The footsteps stopped directly above me. Floorboards creaking under weight that didn't move, didn't retreat, just waited. I closed the cabinet, pocketed the key, climbed back toward the light, with the tick still counting behind me, patient, mechanical, indifferent to what I'd just discovered. The kitchen was empty when I emerged. Coffee cold in the pot, a single glass in the sink that hadn't been there before. I checked the ledger photos on my phone, scrolled to page 47, zoomed in on Maya's entry. The ledger line now empty. I swallowed the sentence before it shook loose. The photographs glowed on my laptop screen, 17 pages of names, figures, destinations. Maya's entry still visible in my saved copies, even if the original had somehow vanished from the ledger downstairs. Someone had erased her twice now. Once from the death certificate, once from the evidence itself. Thud. My pulse or the radiator. I couldn't tell anymore. The motel room smelled of chlorine and desperation, the kind of place where people came to disappear or decide. I had checked in under a name I'd invented in the parking lot. Cash only, no questions. The Foundation's offshore accounts traced back to a shipping company in Malta. The shipping company connected to a medical tourism network. The network led to a single address, a converted monastery 3 hours north, where procedures happened without paperwork, and patients sometimes checked in but rarely checked out. Thud. Air tasted of copper and erased ink. I'd spent 6 hours mapping the connections, following breadcrumbs Maya had scattered before they silenced her. She'd known, she'd documented everything. And then she'd trusted the wrong person with one phone call. Richard answered on the second ring when she'd called him. I found the log buried in her cloud backup. 43 minutes of conversation, time-stamped 71 hours before her heart stopped. Snap. I closed the laptop, opened it again. The cursor blinked on a blank email draft addressed to a journalist I'd never met, someone who'd written about medical trafficking 6 months ago, someone outside the family's reach. I could send everything and watch the empire burn, or bury it and keep breathing in their shadow. Thud. Door 3 didn't exist. Cut. The monastery files showed a ceremony scheduled for sunrise. Some kind of dedication event. Donors. Board members. Local officials photographed smiling beside patients who'd signed consent forms they couldn't read. Richard's name appeared on the guest list. So did my mother's. I typed 3 words into the email draft, checked the attachments, then deleted them, then typed them again. Bargaining with the dark to buy back a soul meant becoming fluent in its language first. I needed more than photographs. I needed the physical ledger, the original seals, the records they thought they'd buried with my sister's real name. I needed to walk into that monastery before sunrise and take back what they'd sold. The radiator clicked off. Silence pooled around me like cold water rising. 5:57, and the lock began to hum. The signature dried midair, refusing to land. I'd found the seal maker 3 towns over, a man who asked no questions and accepted only cash. His workshop smelled of hot wax and older secrets. He'd studied the photographs I'd brought, traced the family crest with a fingernail yellowed by decades of this work, and nodded once. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "before the birds." Snap. I drove back to the motel through roads that forgot streetlights existed. The counter seal sat heavy in my coat pocket, brass and lies molded into something that could overwrite 40 years of forgery. One press into wet wax, and Maya's real name would exist again, official, undeniable, permanent. The bathroom mirror caught me as I passed. Cut. My reflection blinked a half-second late. I stopped, watched. My hand rose to touch the glass, but the figure in the mirror smiled before I did, lips curling upward while mine stayed flat, eyes crinkling at corners that hadn't moved yet. I stepped back. The reflection corrected itself. Same face, same exhaustion, same shadows pooling beneath cheekbones that had forgotten meals. But for one breath, something else had worn my skin and found the whole thing amusing. The calm that settles when you decide to commit the crime they accused you of. I laid everything on the bed. The counter seal, the photographed ledger pages, a notarized copy of Maya's original birth certificate I'd pulled from a county archive that should have been sealed. The motel lamp flickered twice, steadied, resumed its humming vigil. Ink twitched, pen halted, breath snagged, clock hissed, wax pulled, flame bent, seal pressed, name burned. I practiced the motion 17 times. The angle of approach, the pressure required, the 3-second hold while the impression set. By morning, Richard's ceremony would begin with donors and cameras and champagne flutes raised to a legacy built on purchased silence. By morning, I would walk into that registry room and press truth into their lie before anyone could stop me. Heartbeat drummed Morse code against my ribs. Not yet, not yet. I checked my phone, Maya's voicemail still saved, her voice still warning me about foundations and ledgers and men who smile while they sell you. Tomorrow the world will witness it all. Tonight I held the only copy. I set the seal on the nightstand, watched the brass catch lamplight like a second sun rising early. This time the signature landed through my finger, not the pen. 3. The projector warmed behind the velvet curtain. 200 donors filled the ballroom in black tie and blind faith, champagne stems catching chandelier light like prayer candles for a congregation that worshipped discretion. 2. Richard took the podium, adjusted his cufflinks, smiled the smile I'd watched him practice in bathroom mirrors since I was 9 years old, the one that said, "Trust me," while his hands moved towards your wallet. 1. Snap. The screen flickered to life behind him, not his prepared slideshow, not the foundation's glossy mission statement, the ledger. Page after page, names and numbers scrolling in silence while the room's collective breath caught and held. I felt it happen, the inhale. 200 lungs drawing air at once, the soft whisper of fabric shifting as bodies leaned forward, the almost imperceptible creak of chairs adjusting under sudden tension. Someone's wineglass touched a table edge. A woman near the back pressed her palm flat against her sternum. The room breathed in and forgot to breathe out. Spotlights screamed across the ceiling like startled birds. Richard turned, saw his own signature illuminated 12 feet tall. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. A fish learning that the bowl had always been glass. Cut. A stranger 3 tables over lifted her phone. The screen caught the projection's glow, and I watched my own face appear in her camera roll. A photograph someone had taken without my noticing, timestamped 10 minutes ago, already captioned with a question mark. Her thumb hovered over the share icon. Paused. Swiped left instead, pulling up another image. The ledger page with Maya's entry circled in red. She wasn't documenting scandal. She was cataloging evidence. The murmuring began. Low, at first. A tide of whispers that built into something sharper, accusations dressed as questions, concern performed for neighboring tables. Drexubasis. Richard's water glass, struck by a trembling hand. The sound cut through everything. I stayed in my seat. Let them look, let them photograph. Let them understand that the horror they'd RSVP'd to had been scheduled years before I walked through the door. My uncle's eyes found mine across the ballroom. No mask now, no calculation, just the raw arithmetic of a man watching his empire subtract itself in real time. Time paused. Anxiety shifted to them, not me. Eleanor rushed the projector. Too late. The damage had already downloaded into 200 phones, 200 cloud accounts, 200 conversations that would outlive every NDA the family had ever drafted. I raised my glass, smiled the smile I'd learned from watching him. Applause, please, bury me louder. The confession left his mouth before the question reached my ears. Richard stood in the registry office doorway, tie loosened, hair displaced for the first time in 40 years of family portraits. Behind him, the gala continued its collapse. Sirens approaching, guests demanding explanations, Eleanor sobbing into a napkin embroidered with our family crest. I can explain, he said, but his voice had already surrendered. Snap. The notary sat frozen at her desk. She'd been mid-signature when I'd walked in, some routine document, some ordinary Tuesday before it became evidence. Now she watched us like a woman who understood she'd become a witness to something that would require lawyers. The room dropped 1 degree. I felt it in my fingertips first, the cold spreading upward through my wrists. The brass counter seal in my palm conducted the chill like a promise. Another degree. Richard's breath started to fog. The notary pulled her cardigan tighter without looking away from the space between us. Another degree. Frost bloomed along the metal edge of the filing cabinet, thin crystals forming patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost alphabetic. Another degree. And then nothing moved at all. Cut. I pressed the counter seal into the wax beside Maya's registry entry. The notary's stamp waited inches away, her hand suspended above it, trembling. Richard's mouth began to shift. First, the left corner, lifting, a millimeter of movement that took 3 heartbeats to complete. Then the right corner followed, slower, fighting against muscles that wanted to collapse instead. His eyes crinkled before his cheeks caught up, creating a delay that made the expression look borrowed from someone else's face. The smirk reached full formation and held there, suspended in the fluorescent light like a mask being fitted from the inside. "You think this changes anything?" he said. The notary's hand descended. Stamp met paper. Times HHHH. Ink bled like reclaimed blood across the parchment. Maya's name, her real name, now existed in official record, witnessed, time-stamped, irreversible. I lifted the counter seal. The impression gleamed wet and perfect. Richard reached into his jacket, produced a folded document, laid it on the desk between us like a peace offering made of paper and denial. "A settlement," he said. "Generous, enough to forget. I didn't touch it, didn't need to. The letterhead told me everything. Drafted before the gala, before the projector, before any of this. He'd known I would come. He'd prepared for surrender while still performing victory." The notary's eyes met mine. She'd seen enough. His apology arrived, already forged. Almost. The registry office clock hung crooked on the wall, had probably hung that way for decades, ignored by everyone who'd passed through seeking stamps and signatures and legal resurrections. Now I watched its second hand like a surgeon monitoring a flat line. The hand moved, dragged itself through air thick as honey, pulling a faint trail of dust motes behind it like witnesses too small to testify. 1 second stretched into a sentence, then another, then a third that refused to end until the mechanism clicked forward and released time back into the room. Snap! Downstairs, the gala's remnants pulsed. Bass from the speakers they hadn't thought to kill yet, a rhythm that climbed through the floorboards and found my chest. My heart matched it without permission. Thump, thump, thump. The same tempo that had soundtracked 100 family events. 100 lies dressed in black tie, 100 moments where I'd smiled and swallowed and stayed silent. Not anymore. Cut. Richard hadn't moved from the doorway. His settlement offer still lay untouched on the desk, a rectangle of denial slowly curling at the edges. The notary's stamp had dried. Maya's name existed now, officially, permanently, in ink that couldn't be erased or edited or sold. Blue lights painted the window. Thump, 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 the bass line below. The sirens outside, my pulse threading between them like a needle stitching 2 worlds together. Richard turned toward the flashing lights. His jaw worked silently, calculating exits that no longer existed. The fluorescence flickered. Once. Twice. Gone. True silence. The kind that lives in the space between heartbeats. In the pause before a verdict. In the held breath of a room that knows something irreversible is about to happen. No bass, no sirens, no clock, just the darkness and the waiting and the weight of what came next. The lights returned. 2 officers stood where Richard had been calculating. Handcuffs caught the fluorescent glare, chrome circles that looked almost ceremonial, almost gentle, almost merciful. Chains clinked sweeter than any wedding bell. They read him rights. He'd spent decades denying others. His wrists disappeared into metal. His shoulders dropped, not in defeat, but in the exhausted relief of a man who'd been running so long he'd forgotten he was tired. The notary gathered her papers. The clock resumed its crooked counting. I watched them lead him past the window, blue lights still spinning, the settlement offer abandoned on the desk like a language no one spoke anymore. The room's oxygen finally belonged to me. 0 hits when the seal lifts. A wisp of smoke curled upward, thin as a whispered secret finally escaping. Dawn broke through the kitchen window of the house I'd grown up in. The same copper pots caught the light, the same ones that had witnessed 1,000 family breakfasts, 1,000 silences dressed as peace. I'd come back one last time. Not to stay. To finish. The basin sat on the counter, ceramic, white, the kind we'd used for Easter eggs when Maya and I were small enough to believe in resurrection. Snap. I struck the match. The room inhaled. I felt it. The walls drawing inward, the curtains pulling taut, the air itself condensing around the flame I held above the forged death certificate. Every molecule of oxygen in that kitchen gathered close, waiting to feed what came next or suffocate it entirely. The house held its breath the way it had held secrets for 40 years. I lowered the match. Cut. Paper caught. Edges blackened, curled, surrendered to heat that moved inward, like justice arriving late, but certain. The false name, Mary Ellen, disappeared first. Letter by letter. Consumed by something older than family money, older than forged seals, older than the lies they'd paid to preserve. Maya. Her name rose with the smoke. I said it again, softer. Maya. And once more, barely a breath. Maya. The flame climbed higher. Warmth pressed against my face. Gentle at first, then insistent, then bright enough to blur the edges of everything I was seeing. The kitchen softened. The copper pots became smears of amber light. My own hands dissolved into the glow until I couldn't tell where the fire ended, and I began. Smoke spelled the name they tried to erase, curling into dawn like a soul set free. I watched the last corner of the certificate fold into ash. Watched the family crest melt into nothing. Watched decades of silence transform into something weightless that rose through morning light and scattered toward a sky that had been waiting all along. The basin cooled. Gray dust settled where the lie had been. I touched the edge, still warm, still real, still proof that some things burn because they were never meant to last. The first clean breath after years of breathing someone's lie filled my lungs. No copper taste. No erased ink. Just air and light and the quiet knowledge that Maya's name existed again, in official record, in scattered ash, in every breath I would take from this morning forward. I left the basin on the counter, let the copper pots keep their vigil. The door closed behind me softer than any ending should. Ash carried what was mine.